Oh, I see.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel. My name is Samantha Wellington. My pronouns are she and hers. I'm the Executive Vice President of Business Affairs. I'm the Chief Legal Officer and Secretary at TriNet. Welcome to everyone. And also my fellow panel members to today's session, which is the Equity Toolkit, Understanding Inclusive Decision-Making Methodologies. So I'm going to take 1 second to talk about TriNet. TriNet is a professional employer organization, which means that we co-employ the employees of our clients, and we provide outsourced HR benefits and compliance expertise. We have the privilege of having Start Out as a client of TriNet, and we are also a very proud sponsor of Start Out through our TriNet Pride CRG. So with that, we shall move on to far more exciting things, which are our panelists. So let us start, please, with Chris.
Hi, friends. My name is Chris. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the COO of Idle. We're a full-service marketplace for alternative content creators that provides business tools, legal banking, and safety to our community of escorts, cammers, dancers, you name it. So think like OnlyFans, but founded by diverse women who care and not predatory men who don't. We're launching the beta in October with access to the public in early 23. And for more info, find me on IG or LinkedIn or check out idleidle.com.
Fantastic. And Graham, how about you?
Hello, Graham Nolan, he, him pronouns, mostly usually based out of Austin, Texas, coming to you from Chicago today. Co-chair and of storytelling and partnerships for Do the Work, which is a LGBTQ advertising and marketing community. We are as far as I know, the premier LGBTQ community for this industry. And we have the mission to elevate queer creativity, representation, and share a voice across advertising and marketing.
Perfect. And last but by no means least, Milena.
Hey there. So my name is Milena Berry. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Power to Fly. My pronouns are she and her. You can find us on powertofly.com. If you aren't familiar with what we do, we really exist with a mission to fast track economic equity by upskilling and connecting underrepresented talent to roles in highly visible sectors. I'm an immigrant. I am a mother of 4. I am queer and happily and proudly married to a transgender woman. And so participating in this panel is truly an honor. I'm excited to contribute in any way I can to the startup community.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Now, and I do want to take time to share. So number one, thank you to everyone for introducing yourselves in the chat. That's awesome. I love it. I forgot to tell everyone where I'm from. I'm usually from, well, my accent tells you that, or perhaps that I'm from Australia. I usually live in San Francisco, but today I come to you from a dressing room in New York. So before we had this, before we sort of got here today, the panelists and I have had opportunity to talk about this concept of inclusive decision making. And I will be honest with everyone, when we sort of talked about creating this panel and which one I felt strongly about engaging with. This was the one that I really wanted to be a part of, because I do think that inclusive decision making weaved into the strategy and functions of an organization truly has the power to actually change that organization for the better and for the good. But it's hard, and it takes work, and it takes real intentional work. And so I think what we might do is I'm going to get us started in thinking about how I think about starting off inclusive decision making, and one of the first steps that an organization can take. And then I'm going to ask the panelists to share. I'm certainly paying attention to the chat. So if we see something that we want to pay attention to in the chat, we'll certainly do that as well. All right, so to start off, for me, I think there are two things, right? The first steps that an organization that's interested in inclusivity could take. The first is starting with intention, and the second is writing things down. I realize they sound super basic. However, you would be surprised, or maybe not, by the number of folk and organizations that miss those steps and sort of go great to sort of the bright, sexy stuff that they want to do at the end, but missing out on those sort of initial steps. So the first piece, starting with intention, I do think that there is potentially a fear associated with weaving in inclusivity. And sometimes that's around, like, we might not get it right, or we might inadvertently alienate some people. And that's probably true. You probably will do that multiple times, and that's okay, so long as you acknowledge it, and change what you're doing for the next time. But what happens is that nothing actually gets done if you don't start. Sounds obvious, but it's true. And writing things down. So working through the why behind the what. Why does your organization care about inclusivity? That's really important, right? We can all stand around and say we want to be inclusive, but if we don't know why, if we hadn't written down for our organization why we want to be inclusive, it can be really easy to get distracted or perhaps lose your intention. So the root of the why and why we care is going to be unique to the culture of your organization and the makeup of your employees. So get the why down on paper, write it down, and you won't get it right the first time. That's totally cool. Like, you won't get it right the second time either. It needs to be sort of a living, breathing type thing that you work through. And you also want to create some sort of rules of engagement that deal with how you're going to adjust your why. And this is how we operate with each other. All right, so that's how I think about starting. And then I think we might ask Milena, how do you think about starting this concept of sort of inclusive decision making?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that it totally resonates with me what you said about we might make a mistake, we might not get it right, but it's still important to start. And what I want to add to that is that learn from those mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not going to get it right, and so absolutely think about, like, all right, what went wrong in this situation? How can I get it right the next time?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it was a PR crisis because you said the wrong thing on LinkedIn. Perhaps it was something else, but absolutely dissect the things that went wrong and then improve and iterate on that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that it's so important as part of this kind of writing down the why and being thoughtful and intentional about it. It's interesting. I just spoke at an event earlier this morning, and they asked me, how do you not do it in a performative way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, it's so important that you do it across every single work stream of the company, right? So it's not just about what you post on Twitter and LinkedIn, right? It's not just about the external communication. It's about your recruiting processes. It's about the suppliers you work with. It's about, like, it's literally every single facet of your business has to be imbued and influenced by your commitment to improving DEIB for you to make a difference.
Which only works if you've written down your why. Because if you've written down your why and you understand why you as an organization are doing it, then you can weave it through all of those different pieces to ensure that you actually are being authentic, because it becomes part of the fabric of who your organization is and how you present yourself. Okay, I love that. All right, Graham, how about you? How do you think about it?
If you see me typing, it's because I'm like we've talked before about some of these issues, but like I'm getting renewed inspiration around this. I wrote down, start with the wrong thing. My day job is that I'm a public relations consultant, and very frequently, if you sort of ask people what they want to do or what they want to say, they will say, "I don't know. You tell me. You're the comms person." It's like, that's weird. I shouldn't be determining the direction for this. I will intentionally write the wrong thing down so they can respond to it. And they're like, nope, it's not that, it's this. Like, people love to edit, right? So I think that in terms of the documentation, it's so smart because it allows you to, it gives you freedom to almost start in the wrong place. And the thing about this is because LGBTQ IA, Two Spirit Plus, like inherently there's so many communities there, right? There's so many different voices, and I love that the name of the community, though it gets dismissed as alphabet soup, is so representative of the fact that you have multiple communities within this community, and they're the real authors, right? So it's just like, it's not like you're writing forth the thing that is like just representative of you. It's only the right story when it's reflective of all the people. Like everyone else in the community is actually kind of the author here. So if you start with the wrong, that's the way to get the right direction. And I say this with the humility of, I have huge imposter about having like founded this organization at the get. It's for advertising and marketing people. I never agency. I had never led a campaign, and everyone's like, "But you care so much about like who you love, right?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't date." But it's not. It's like it's not about me, right? But if anyone calls me out for like, why do you deserve to lead this? There's kind of a, I'm the one who wrote down something, right, for everyone to respond to. The other thing is that when we started our organization, we knew that we needed to include other voices. So we were going to do a conference first. We were going to have, and COVID got in the way of that. But in the meantime, it was just like we had an initial leadership team that was very event focused because we were going to put on a conference. They did not have the right racial balance. They did not have the right identity balance. But we were just like, if we can be seen, we can be edited. So there is, the progress comes from the imperfection. It's not just about accepting imperfection as the means by which you can build a better foundation.
So I kind of love that. And I want to, I see Chris nodding emphatically, and I want to get to you. But I also want to tell you, Graham. Oh, really? We're good? Okay. So I see Chris nodding emphatically, and I'll come to you in 1 second. I wanted to say to you, Graham, I was speaking with Andreas Wild, the executive director of Startout, just yesterday, and he said in that session, if you don't have imposter syndrome, then you're not trying hard enough. So you are clearly trying hard enough.
It's a relief.
And I love that as a statement. I thought it was awesome. He actually attributed it to someone else, but I'll attribute to him because I think he's fabulous. All right. Christina, Chris, could we go to you?
No, I was just, I can't help but be excited and enthusiastic, right? This is the thing I love talking about. So I love hearing people talk about it. To build off of like what Samantha and Graham said, like culture is living and it should be living, and we should look at it as though something that is allowed to constantly change or get better, right? That's how we keep it growing in the right direction. It's how it doesn't get stagnant. And then like, if I'm working with a new team and they're trying to figure out how they can communicate better with each other, but maybe they don't have resources, your company, I think companies are called companies because they're about the people that they keep around them. So you've selected those people with it to be your company because these are your co-brains, the people you want to think with, right? So even if you have no money, you can create a Google Doc, drop a feedback form in, and disseminate it to all your teams and see, what the feeling is on culture, give them some questions about it, and you'll see natural culture leaders arise. And then you can, get them together, empower them all at the same level. And then as a company, support that work, and that is like a free, easiest, quickest way you could get into starting to create culture around your company.
Yeah, I think so I've actually never heard that before, that idea of, we call it a company because it's the company you keep. I love that. I think it's awesome. The other thing that I always say is that a company is really just a bunch of people, right? Like there's no, like a company is just a bunch of humans working together. And so the humans and the people that make up the thing are really what you're trying to get to.
Totally. And people lose, where culture dies is because people start caring about the numbers more than the people that produce those numbers.
Yeah. So let's move on. So that's how we all sort of think about starting. Let's move on to thinking about sort of the concept of inclusivity inside of your organization and what the next step is. And Chris, I know we've just been talking, but I'm going to come straight to you because we've had some really interesting conversations about sort of inclusive product design and UX and how to build inclusive thought into your product design and UX. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit for everyone.
Definitely. I'm disabled. I'm physically disabled. I found that out towards the beginning of the pandemic. And then, I got ADHD and, neurodiverse. And so as a young person growing up, I really didn't realize that people didn't see or think things the same as I did. Mm-hmm. So when I first went to get a UX team to create the flow for my Big and Tall Men's website, my second Big and Tall Men's website. I said, hey, I've already interviewed 400 Big and Tall Men, but we need more. So here, team, here's some emails, go interview them and figure out what their issues are with getting dressed. A couple of days later, this UX team comes back to me and they're like, hey, so we're having trouble. We are not sure how to talk to fat people about being fat. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. That is not exactly what we're talking about, right? Ask them about how hard it is to shop. Ask them about when the last time they bought something was. Ask them about, who purchases the clothing in their home. Ask them about how old their oldest garment is or how new their newest garment is. Find out data around what is difficult for them or what is different for them, as opposed to just continuing to highlight the differences and seeing that those things don't fit or what's uncomfortable, right? Giving them the right questions helped them be able to go back and, get the data that we needed to create the UX. But it was just interesting to see, I think that most people are poised to look at that from the angle of what makes us different, as opposed to, of course, everyone is different. What things can we do to figure out how to support each other's work the best, as opposed to just understand what's different and create a little space for that, right? Inclusive as opposed to just labeling things.
Yeah, because then it's not actually the approach you're describing is it's not, it is truly about inclusion.
Yeah. And so you also have a question, Chris, that you always ask. Could you share that with everyone?
Sure. Yeah. I love getting feedback. I think one of the number one things companies aren't doing is asking really face-to-face or even pretty directly email, asking the people who would be users or asking their users about their products, or even testing it amongst possibly diverse users that still fall into your product market fit, right? So one of my favorite questions to ask on a survey is, what did we not think to ask you and how would you answer it? To, allow the customer to give you a different perspective, to allow anyone to give you a diversity of perspective, right? So that you can just continue to build your product better. Because there's oh man, I wrote it down yesterday because I was like Graham thinking and taking more notes about this. When you demand a diverse team to work on your products, you give your product the best chance it has at becoming the unlimited thing it could become, right? So much more than if one person thinks about it, so much more than if one type of person is thinking about it, right? And that's also the cheapest way to get to innovation. So
yes. And have people beating something up, which is what you want, right? You want people beating the thing up to make it better.
Totally.
All right, Graham, I saw you nodding emphatically during that piece from Chris.
Yeah, Chris's approach speaks to the need for strategy, and the means of building that off of insights, right? That's the way that advertising should go. In our sector, our biggest faults are thinking very tactically and not starting with what is the truth that we're doing? What is the problem that we're even solving? You'll go to pretty far down some advertising conversations before someone's like, we could do this and it'll cost $1 million. And then you're like, oh, what's it supposed to do? And they're like, oh, I don't know. So starting from a place of insight is great. And I think that, inclusion from the get-go is so important to getting the insights right in this case. I think in both the world of marketing and the world of entrepreneurialism, I can't believe I got the word without tripping on it. Yay. In both of those worlds, there is this very human desire to get it together, get it right, seem like you've got your stuff together, and then show it to the world. But the fact is, the idea hasn't even started to become real at all until you get your first audience, until you start to get your first responses, right? And especially if you're trying to build something inclusive, like none of this is real until I start to show someone who ain't me, right? So it's like one of the things I try to do, very respectful of strategy in our industry, and by the way, I'm staying in a strategist's house, so she's gonna love this. Is I was unemployed when I started all this, and I spent 4 months just talking to anyone who will talk to me. And what did we get to? We got to a place of not solutions, but the questions we needed to ask. And then we started to build out meta resources that were based on that. And then, like, and Chris, you're talking about some of the discomfort that comes with this. It's like, yeah, that's a sign that you're going into undiscovered territory, right? Like that means you're asking the questions that you need to ask, and you have to find ways to do it. Like take the discomfort upon yourself to make others feel included. In the process, building a group around those insights and a community around those insights, assigning people to, we have 2 specific people on our leadership team whose job is to run every step of the process. By the way, you're missing this voice. Oh shit. Like, okay, let's include that voice. Like, that's fantastic. And then to operate with a leadership team where every Friday, every issue gets brought up with all of them, and they're the most diverse group possible. We're still fixing that. But it's like they're currently the most diverse that they can be in terms of who we've encountered. And they all give their perspectives on stuff and say, you're missing this. Like, there's a lot of that. So I think there's this mentality of like inclusion comes, the only inclusion only really starts when you get those people in the room. And I think that in so many industries, for the sake of efficiencies, we go like, let's keep the team lean and let's do this, but like only when they unveil what they do does the process really begin.
Yeah, and what I think is really interesting about what both of you are saying, and this, you're describing a lot of intentional process, which is where we started at the beginning, right? But you're describing an intentional process that actually it's a governance process. And I realize I'm a lawyer and I'm the one talking about governance here, and that doesn't make anyone happy, but it's governance. And I think the thing that we miss, I really genuinely believe that the thing that organizations miss at the very beginning when they're doing this work is because they're so excited to get in and do that. They're so excited to like be inclusive and like have diverse teams and let's create a diverse panel and do all these things. But if you don't give folk guidance in terms of what they're supposed to do with their diverse panel, right? What is the purpose of the diverse panel and how does it give feedback and what is the process for doing that? Then it won't become self-sustaining and it won't be a thing that is truly woven into the feedback of your decision making. And I think it's so easy to skip over that first bit. Go ahead.
And they never do it together either, do they?
Mm-hmm.
Determines like what they'll do and then they hand it down, or they say we want you ERG who doesn't have a ton of resources to hand stuff up to us. It's never like together. This is fair here. We love hierarchy, right? And it's got to be reported to us or we have to hand it down. It's like, why would you not sit down with the generation of talent that has been groomed, and wrong word, that has been equipped with the vocabulary of DEI and make them the start of the conversation in the room with senior people versus all this back and forth?
Yes.
Yeah. The one thing that kind of I keep reflecting on as I hear all of you speak is that it's interesting how we're at various sizes of our organizations, right? TriNet, I don't even know how many employees you have. I imagine a lot. My family is on the TriNet benefits via my wife. Yes. Power to Fly, we're around 200 folks. I have no idea how big your orgs are, Christina and Graham, but I noticed that within Power to Fly, our needs and approach and everything kind of changed a little bit as we grew, as the size of the organization. Of course, there's common principles, right? Like this intentionality, this write it down, this have a strategy, I think is the same no matter what your size is. But then on the implementation level, things are changing. So for example, as our team, which we started as a very, as an organization focused on gender equity, the first 4 years of the organization were really focused on, bringing more women in the workplace. And then in the last 3 years, we have widened a lot and we have said, wait, the solutions we're bringing to market are really similar, of course, with differences, but similar as the solutions that are needed for underrepresented folks, whether that's the LGBTQI plus community, whether that's folks with visible or invisible disabilities, whether that's people of color, etc. And as we started kind of like, changing the makeup of our own team, we noticed that the types of programs we have to do like really are changing as well. And so one thing I also encourage is to absolutely run demographic surveys from early on in the organization. Invest in this early, right? So that you can track, all right, this is how we're doing on this, diversity vector. This is how we're doing on the other. And you can always course correct, right? Like, so perhaps we're doing great. We have a lot of women, but we don't have enough, women of color in leadership position, or perhaps we're doing great on women and people of color, but we don't have any non-binary folks, like things like that. You have to be intentional with what are the pockets that you need to fill. And then you absolutely, on top of the demographic surveys, you have to run engagement surveys to ask some of the questions that Chris was talking about in kind of terms of like marketing and going to market. The same things can be asked in an open-ended fashion with your employees. So that what else didn't we think about? What else is going on that we're not asking you in this engagement survey? And I can actually then start to see by demographic and by department, what are the issues that are bubbling up in the organization?
And you unlock the potential that your employees can see that you can't see, which is the whole reason why you have tiers and levels of employees. So you only hurt yourself by not listening to them or by not allowing the information to flow up, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest obstacle to it is not lack of resources or lack of methodology or lack of consultants who could help you in this, but one excuse disguises various excuses, which is I don't want to find out how I'm doing it wrong, and I don't want anyone else to find out how I'm doing it wrong. If I find out these numbers, then people are just going to attack us for those. The woke armies will come for us. It's just like, everyone needs to know where they stand and accept that we're all not getting it right and that we all have room for improvement. Humility is huge to getting to the point where you can consider the right systems for doing this. Like, all the stuff that you're rattling off is great resources. And all I can hear is executives sort of telling me some reason for like why that's not the right idea right now. And it's because they're afraid to find out how they don't have it right.
I agree with you. There's this element of like, I don't want to be outed as being bad at this, but I do disagree with what you said. I don't know exactly what you said, but it was along the lines of resources are not a problem. Resources are a problem. Like, a lot of companies want to get it done for free. And I really don't think that's the right way to think about it. Yes, there is the bottom-up initiative. Our workers want us to be better at DEIB, but also from the top down, we have to give them the resources for these programs to be executed. Chief diversity officers are the one underfunded function in corporate America, right? Like, ERGs have zero budgets, zero. They get given $2,000 a year to run their programming in large organizations. So this is nothing. This is peanuts compared to the investments that are being done in other parts of the business that are deemed important. So if DIB is truly important, give the money for it to be important.
So sorry, Samantha. A great financial reason why that matters, Milena, is because if you are supporting your employees, less turnover, less money spent hiring folks, less money and time spent training people and adding them to teams and bringing them on board. Your teams can develop faster, richer, and eventually that all translates to your product, your sales, and, just employee satisfaction. Right now, a lot of businesses run just like the US political system. We are not happy with what's happening at the top, right? So what are people doing? Fleeing, going different places, whatever else they can think to do, right? When really all inclusion is treating each other like we know we really should be treating each other. Yeah.
And so I actually do want to jump in because you said something there, Graham, that I agree with, but I also disagree with around, I certainly hear a lot, this idea that, I don't want to find out because I might be doing it wrong and then everyone will know I'm doing it wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. I actually think the root cause behind I don't want to find out is because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the information that I get. And I actually think too, sort of Melena's point, that is where sort of the resourcing comes in, because we were sort of talking about this idea earlier, Graham, of why are we not connecting the top of the house with the bottom of the house and having them work together to solve a problem, right? And I think what tends to happen in organizations is that they'll sort of push it down to Melena's point. I'm going to go ask my CRG to solve it for me because, you know, there's a bunch of Black people over there, or there's a bunch of gay people over there, and they can go solve the problem for me. And then they'll tell me what to do. Except that we're not necessarily resourcing them to do that, and they haven't necessarily been given guidance because the top of the house doesn't know what it actually is trying to achieve, right? We say we want inclusion, we say we want this diverse kind of concept, we say we care about it, but we don't necessarily know what that means in practice. And I do think that at the risk of sounding repetitive, I do think that brings you back to like writing down your why at the very beginning and understanding why you're doing it in the first place. It's so important. Doesn't, to Graham's point earlier, doesn't have to be right. In fact, it can be wrong at the very beginning, but the act of writing it down and moving through that will get you to a purpose that will mean that when you actually do the good work that Melena just talked about, this idea of understanding what your organization actually looks like, you can then do something intentional with the information that you have. And I actually wanted to use that, I wasn't going to, but it works quite well as a nice segue into the sort of the conversation about corporate values and mission and vision. Because I do think that that concept of writing it down always has to come back to why you're doing this has to fit into your mission, vision, and corporate values. Now, we as a group had various conversations about sort of corporate values and how we should think about writing them down and how you can use those to help weave through your organization. Melena, this is like the one topic that you and I didn't talk about, but I'd like to go to you first, actually, and talk about, not because I'm trying to trick you, but I'm trusting that you're going to have some strong ideas on this, and how you weave those concepts through your corporate values, and then how you use them to create intentional decision making.
Yeah, I will say that I also rely on my team to keep me honest, right? So as we were working on our own corporate strategy a month or two ago, we put DIB is the cornerstone of everything we do. And then next month, as we were making some really tough decisions on the budget front, my senior director of DIB came and said, like, remember when you put that in your corporate strategy doc? Now's the time to not cut my budget here for this, right? So I think this is just so important to write it down. And by the way, when we wrote that down, DAB is at the corner of every part of the company. What ended up happening is that, okay, so that was the company strategy. Then every team later had to then repurpose that and build the level down, our product strategy, our go-to-market strategy, our customer success strategy, our marketing strategy. And they were thinking, how do I imbue that in everything that I do? Right. So again, back to the idea that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is not just about recruiting. It's not just about, telling the world that you're not a racist. It's really about the full comprehensive, everything that your company does. So again, like some companies, I don't know, retailers, they're going to be dealing with their supply chains. Is your supply chain, made up of diverse suppliers? Some companies are working with, retail and in-office employees. Are you looking at the diversity of both audiences, although they're quite different, corporate function and retail function, right? Are you thinking about, the models that you're using in your ad campaigns? Right, that's external communications and what you're going out there. Are you thinking about the charitable contributions that your company is making, and are those recipients diverse? Right, these are all like very, very various things, not just your day-to-day operations as a company, that are just so important to think about DIB through that lens. And again, our process is normal. Yeah, it starts with a why, but then you create a 3-year strategy. We work on that with a lot of our customers, and a 3-year strategy in phases, right? Okay, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. And then of course the plan is the basis for change, and you look at it every quarter, and you adapt as the world changes and your company changes. But it's so important to have a long-term plan, and then to hold yourself accountable on that execution.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. What you were talking about in terms of procurement, sort of, you mentioned a number of things, but the one that really stuck out for me was sort of procurement and diversity in your supply chain and this sort of thing. And I realized that when I talk about process and policy, it sounds very big company, right? Malena's right. TriNet has about 4,500 corporate employees, and we have 610,000 humans that we support across the country. So that's a relatively large company, and it needs policy and process to sort of do those things. I do think that regardless of how small your organization is, you do still need to write it down. Now, maybe it's not as big a piece of paper. It could be one piece of paper that just has 5 bullets on it that says, like, remember to check this before you sign that vendor contract. But I do think you need the reminders that because it's one thing to sit in an offsite strategy meeting and say, oh yes, we care about this thing. But to Malena's point, if I didn't write it down and then didn't have a checklist that said, oh, I was supposed to care about that thing when I'm now making this hard decision, it's very easy to lose track of that decision. It's very easy to sort of to put it off for next time. And that's not inclusive decision making at all, or it's intentionally exclusive, actually. And I think I do think it's important to sort of, whilst we are talking about sort of big company concepts, in some ways, you can like that's part of what TriNet does, actually. We translate big company concepts into small companies, so that SMBs can do the same work that large companies do. And I do think, like, it's okay if your policy is literally 3 bullets on a page. That's okay. If your organization is small and that's what suits you, cool. Like, jot down the things that will remind you, and that's your policy. You can call it a policy. It's great. All right. Let's talk a little bit about, you were talking, Malena, about this idea of allowing your team to keep you in check. And I think that's super important, right? Like, one of the things that I think has been most impactful in our corporation has been allowing voices to be heard in impactful ways, meaning that if we are in a company all hands and my CEO uses a term that is inappropriate, he says off the reservation or something like this, we have the license, any one of us has the license to call him out in that space, in that moment. And that's what has to actually happen. It has to happen in the moment, so that you don't, I think it's really important that the folk who work inside of your organization don't see execs being given a pass, or see folk being given a pass and sort of having a private conversation later. So let's talk a little bit about sort of that language point and creating sort of psychological safety that allows your team to truly give you that honest feedback. And Graham, I might come to you if that's okay.
Mic issues for a moment. Talk a lot about we Chair Kate Wolf loves to talk a lot about brave spaces. That if you're not sort of like pushing through things, if you're not in the ability to sort of, to make those sort of immediate call outs, like, what are we doing, right? If that's not the case, if we can't see a problem and cite it. Again, a lot of the world, I'm biased by my immersion in that world, but we thrive off of problems when we're at our best. But at our worst, we just sort of say, well, we don't have any problems, but like, let's try some things and let's do some things. And it's like, if you don't start from a place of the problem, then what are you really accomplishing, right? What can be your objectives? How can you write them down? Like, you have to start from a problem, right? So what you're talking about right now is so important. The ability to, to do things in the moment there. I think that there is a matter of this of, we've talked so much about diversity in corporations, no matter what the size, in terms of getting people in the room, but we don't talk enough about the dynamics that are set when they get there, right? So we have to have more conversations about, like, what are the new rules of things when people speak up and it's rude or it's unprofessional, and we sort of get dinged because we don't talk about those things here. It's like, I get if you're playing by the old rules, right? You just have to set up and document new rules of engagement that make it easier to do that. Make clear that like when someone speaks up, that is a positive and that is encouraged because we've documented the behaviors by which we expect to change as an organization, right? So,
Yes.
you know, we're talking so much about documentation, various levels of it, and I think it gets exhausting to people too, right?
Yeah.
It gets like, well, like how much of this do I have to do, and like how much do HR people, like how much do they have to write down, and how much do ERGs have to write down? But it actually, Melina, I like the way that you were talking about values though, because it's like if you have those as your North Star, you talked about them as something I think we're just like, no matter how times change, like you've still got these things and they're prescriptive of action, and that's what we'll try to follow. And everything else is, if you have those clearly set, like you have some room to improvise. But in the meantime, yeah, do like document what you can. If it is important to have behavioral change and to have things that weren't acceptable before become acceptable, document those as acceptable, and understand that one of your truest North Stars of the fact that you're getting it right will be discomfort, because you're playing by new rules, because someone was allowed to say something that they couldn't before, that we weren't just doing what we were doing and just, you know, continuing with our rudder in the same direction. It should feel uncomfortable for everyone involved. But to those people who didn't feel comfortable or feel uncomfortable before, I say welcome to the discomfort a lot, because that is the sign that we're in the right way, that the people who were uncomfortable before now welcome you to that feeling, because we're all in this together.
Yes, I love that. I really love that. I actually, so the example I gave was a somewhat real one. The remark was a little different, but you know, we did have an all hands, and I did call out the CEO in front of everyone in a very kind way, because you know, I'm a generally kind person, notwithstanding the fact that I'm an attorney. And we got sort of there were folk who were very uncomfortable with that. There were folk who were very uncomfortable with the fact that the CEO was called out, but he was very comfortable. He was very appreciative, right? He was very appreciative of it. And we used it as a learning opportunity for everyone, but it certainly did make some folk in the organization uncomfortable. And when we sort of received that feedback, we said, awesome, we are doing the right thing. That's great. Welcome. And it's sort of that messaging. Now, Chris, you have some really strong views on psychological safety and why it's so important. So let's talk about that. I think creating that space to be safe is super important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the number one thing that has what do they call it? What are they calling out? The not the recession, the Great Resignation, right? I think the number one reason for all this is that, you know, people are like, yeah, I don't want to feel stressed and unsafe anymore. You know, most workplaces are kind of oppressed. There's a lot of fear. The companies that hire me to go in and help with their teams, help improve the communication, I'm mostly dealing with a leadership team that has produced a ton of fear downward into the company, right? And you don't want your employees making decisions out of fear, because then instead of making the right decisions, they'll make the right decisions for them, you know, and that's not going to grow a team. That's not going to help people want to collaborate, right? And it's exactly what you said, Samantha. You know, that works if the CEO is for it, but it has to, the support of that stuff, and then the language and the communication about how to take on, you know, an example, showing people examples of how to take on or challenge something that has maybe been spoken that wasn't appropriate, right? You have to give people, you have to educate your team and then bring them up to it. And then, you know, like, what is it? One of the old psychologists of great that, you know, was dinging the bell and giving the dog a treat, you know, give them the treat every time they do a good thing, every time they've corrected culture, right? So that we can be excited about correcting culture. And, you know, it's interesting when Elena brought up retail teams, because I came from working to retail teams, which are groups of people that have to work together to be able to go home at the end of the day. So the collaboration on those teams is high. And then, you know, did that for a decade, moved into a more corporate environment where I was like, oh, the collaboration on these teams is not as high. You know, these people don't have as many incentives to work together, and they don't touch or see each other very much, right? So for me, it's that psychological safety is, you know, because it should be the most important thing to a CEO. You want empowered employees thinking brilliant, creative thoughts about your product and leading your teams and your customer service experience, so it can go beyond what you imagined it when you started it, right? Or what the team initially set out the project intention to be, right? So it's just like, and then back to treating people how we know we should, being kind and understanding and curious and, discovering each other.
Yes, and Graham's actually popped something into the chat about quiet quitting, which isn't something that we've talked about as a group before, but I'm going to, because one of the things that I think quiet quitting is really just about discretionary effort, right? It's about the discretionary effort of your employees, right? You as the employer own like the thing you pay people to show up and do every day in the job description. The employee owns their discretionary effort, whether or not they choose to go above and beyond. And the reason why people choose to go above and beyond by far and away is because they're engaged in the work, right? And so the reason why we care about inclusive decision making is because it will drive engagement of your employee base. As Milena was talking about earlier, this concept of how do I measure engagement in my employee base? Engagement is where you get discretionary effort from. And how you kill discretionary effort, one of the really great ways of killing discretionary effort is to make people feel disconnected from your vision and the thing that you're actually trying to do, right? So if people aren't connected to mission, vision, core values, if they don't believe it, if they don't believe the company is actually living those things, they will quiet quit, right? It's been happening for years. It's not like new. It's just it now has a cool name.
Which makes everything that Chris just described sound like a welcome mat.
Yeah.
For people who don't want to step in the door, that's how you do it. It is the direct antidote.
Yes. And it's how you engage, right? That's how you engage. All right, so we're going to do Q&A in this session. I am going to let folk think about the question that they want to ask, and I'm going to, whilst people are thinking, I'm going to ask each of our panelists, what's the thing that you wanted to share with everyone that I didn't give you an opportunity to say or didn't ask you about? I'm going to start with you, Graham.
Oh, I mean, it's I think that the discomfort thing is sort of the summation of a lot of this, right? That none of this is stuff that is solved for everyone. That the inherent nature of this is to include things where you will find out that you don't share opinions. We do so much subjective thinking. If someone comes in and questions me, then I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'm bad. Notice how quickly people go to a place of like, oh, you think I'm a bad person because I said this thing? It's like everyone gets so defensive. I think that, a statement about being welcome to the discomfort is not only something that we personally have to find within ourselves to get the fortitude to do this, but it also speaks very specifically to the policies and the behavior. Like how much of what Melina and Christine and Chris just described, it sounds like behavioral psychology, right? That is not just a business plan, but is to say that like if you can say this, if you can do this, if you can respond in this way, then you are in a position to correct things, and to know that will never quite feel great for everyone, but that's the way that it's going. So I think that it's not just like a pithy little thing for like a tweet to welcome to the discomfort. I think it's like, okay, and set guidelines in new ways that make it possible to do that so that you're all moving forward together.
Yeah, and I love the bit about like the psychological piece and that idea that the company is just the company of the people that you choose to have around you, right? That I love that. It brings you all back to like the fact that your company is just about people. All right, Milena, what did I not give you opportunity to talk about? What did I not give you opportunity to share that you'd like to?
Well, of course, I got to be a good CEO and say, please visit powertofly.com. So we want to get that in. But the thing that I really wanted to comment on is it really resonated with me, Samantha, when you talked about calling out your CEO. And me as a CEO, I'm never afraid to be called out. And I want us to do more of this to all of our leaders. So please practice your fearlessness. If you call out a member of your leadership team who's doing something wrong and you face repercussions for it, well, that was the wrong company for you anyway. I guess what I'm asking for is for us to take this collective action of holding each other accountable as well, because that's how you learn. And frankly, in Power to Fly, we've done, we keep doing mistakes with with using the wrong pronouns for our non-binary folks. And I see that sometimes in leadership meetings, I see sometimes that in team meetings. Every single time we correct the person who's doing it wrong. Sometimes it has been me. Sometimes it has been even our director of DEIB. So nobody is immune, right? Like I'm living with a non-binary person. She's the love of my life, and I still made that mistake. So I really think it's so important that we keep holding each other accountable in those moments. And I want to encourage all of our audience to be brave enough and do that with your leadership. I know it's hard when you're not in a position of power, and it's easy to say it when you're on the top, but please do that because we need it. That's how you do change.
I agree with that 100%. And actually, one of the things that I love to do with panels is give everyone sort of homework, if you like. And I kind of think that one of the action items to come out of this panel is to think about, like, so over the next, where are we? It's Thursday. So go and set yourself a calendar invite or a note, or however you remind yourself to do things. Next Thursday, by next Thursday, you will have developed an idea, developed an approach to think about how you're going to do what Milena just talked about in your organization. How are you going to help create that culture inside your organization? If you're a member of a CRG inside your organization, maybe you get together with 2 other CRGs and you make a proposal to leadership. If you're a member of leadership, you can just start doing it. You can start doing it. I will tell you that it tends to work better in 3s. So if you have 3 members of your leadership team who are willing to engage in change, it tends to work better that way, just from personal experience, but there's also some data that tells you that. But find, if you're a member of leadership, find the other 2 and go start being that change. I think that's really cool. And I would love to, I'm not sure if there's a way, Emma, for us to like check back in with this group of folk who are on our, I would love to hear if we've got sort of folk who have done things inside of their organization over the course of the next week. That would be super awesome. So, and we might give Emma the job of working out how to do that. All right. So Chris, what did I not ask you about that you want to share with everyone?
Sure. I wanted to say that what Milena is saying is, so the only thing that matters is people being willing to be vulnerable instead of egotistic, right? And mostly that being the people above being willing to be vulnerable and open to receiving. And then I think a lot of the people here attending this summit are interested in inclusion, already know about it, are trying to figure out how to get more people on their side, possibly. So what I'd love to give is something that could, maybe help an employer start to shift towards a more culture-focused workplace, because, we don't use hope as like a strategy for how we're going to hit our goals. And culture is just the strategy of how we work at work and how we work together, right? So it's as important as anything else that you're doing. But something that I listened to is a great book by Adam Grant. I can't remember what it's called right now. Oh, it's called Think Again. And he's got such a give me in there that when I heard it, I was like, oh, duh. So around psychological safety, employees are often like the number one fear is that they're going to lose their job, pretty much, right? So something that a company can give to their employees or implement that costs them nothing, that would increase psychological safety, and then, in turn, turn up the knobs on all the other good things that a company is trying to move towards, right? Retention, more sales, employee satisfaction, is lifelong employment. And that sounds crazy, but all it really is a company offering like, hey, if we decide to hire you, we're going to keep you. We're not going to fire you. If there's issues with your role, we're going to retrain you. If you want to work in another department, we'll work on that with you. If you don't like working here anymore, we'll help you find another job somewhere else. And that doesn't cost the company anything, but what it gives to an employee is like such a sense of belonging someplace, right? Such a sense of, oh, these people have asked me to join their team because they want me to stay. And if I struggle, they're going to work with me. Even that, right? It's like such a gift to the employee, but it also financially is such a gift to the employer. It costs a lot less to work with people you already have, retraining, retaining them, than it does hiring and bringing in someone new and bringing them onto the team. So, you know, check out Adam Grant's book, Think Again, because I was blown away by that concept that it could be something that's completely free that a company offers that can just up the psychological safety of the employees in the workplace significantly. And then their stats around it are incredible. Their stats around how it affects the companies that have done it and how it affects the products that have done it are incredible. So
that's super, super interesting. And I think that it's really fascinating to me because I think it sounds terrifying, right? When you first hear that,
right?
That sounds terrifying. And yet when you actually think through it, it's really what you're doing anyway when you're trying to hire a person. When you bring a person into your organization, that's actually exactly what the intent is. It's just you're hedging over the idea that you might have got it wrong by doing it the other, right? Like there's a hedge in there. And if you take out the hedge and say, no, we're all in on this decision, you might find that your hiring cycle gets longer because people might be a little bit more scared of making the wrong decision at the start, maybe. But it's really what you're trying to do when you're hiring a person into your organization. You actually do hire them with the intent that they're going to be part of the future of your organization, at least most.
So why not be the first person in the relationship to tell them, hey, I love you, right? And see that, come with that bravery.
It's so scary, Chris. It's so scary. Right? They don't love me back.
Then you know you have a candidate list of other people that you're going to say.
True.
But it's just, true. I just think it was felt like such a duh moment, you know?
Yeah. All right. So we are nearly at time. I am going to use that. We don't have any questions in the chat, which I'm hoping. Emma tells us it's a great note to end on.
Slightly different, right, Emma? Emma has taken on the task,
everyone, of ensuring that by next Thursday we will follow up with everyone and get your ideas, and maybe we'll even be able to share them with everyone who was here. We'll do that in an anonymized fashion. If people don't want to be attributed, that's fine. The other, yes, do it's good. Excellent. Thank you, Mama. The other thing I did want to give a plug for, Start Out is a phenomenal organization. You're all here at the conference. That's awesome. This is just a really fantastic organization. If you are a LGBTQ plus entrepreneur and you are not yet part of the Start Out Pride Economic Impact Index study, please go onto their website and give them your data. It will help. It is a hugely important study that they're doing there. It is hugely important data, and it is going to be used to change the country. So if you are an LGBTQ entrepreneur, please go onto the website and give them your data. And if you are an entrepreneur regardless, there's also a space for you on the website. We also need your data because it's genuinely being used to help shape public policy arguments. And it really genuinely is impactful information for the policy folk that it's being used with. So please go ahead and do that if you haven't yet. With that, thank you to our panelists. This has been super awesome, and I've really enjoyed the conversation, as well as the time that we got to spend meeting each other previous to this. And thank you to everyone for being part of this panel. We've really, really enjoyed doing it. So thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.